Welcome, everybody. I am very grateful to have you here with us so we can learn from four amazing scientists who will be sharing their experiences and knowledge about wildfires in boreal forests and beyond. Um, Before I begin, I wanted to share with you a couple of days ago, we at the Global Wildfire Collective received an urgent call from help from a PhD student. And she wrote to us because, well, while you may have heard about Europe burning right now, there are uncontrollable wildfires happening in Syria at the moment. And they're still burning. They've been burning rather uncontrollably. And within just a two-day period of time, 3% of its forests have burned. And I've put in here just a couple quotes of what she wrote to us, which is that the fires are burning uncontrollably, entire villages have been erased, vast mountain ranges reduced to ash, the forests are home to thousands of species and wildlife. And importantly, what she said is that what makes this tragedy even more devastating is that we have no qualified teams, no proper equipment, and no national capacity to respond to a disaster of this scale. And of course, as a reminder, this is even worse in Syria because of so much war. They've got landmines in their forest and they've got other explosive remnants. And so this makes firefighting even more dangerous. And I bring this up to you not only in case you happen to feel moved to help, and if you do, we've put a QR code here that links you to a place to donate for these fires, but also to bring up and to highlight the fact that even though we all know that wildfire is a critically urgent global issue, the capacity to deal with wildfires is not evenly distributed. Many regions lack the capacity to understand, to prepare for, to prevent, and to respond to wildfires. So many regions do have tools. You know, a lot of these are the global north, so to speak, but others have almost none. And so this not only leaves the communities there vulnerable, but wildfires, as you'll hear when Sarah talks about smoke, they affect everybody. And this is part of why we have launched the Global Wildfire Collective, because we are hoping to bridge this imbalance and to democratize access to knowledge, tools, and partnerships that can facilitate fire resilience worldwide and to accelerate the pace of creating a more resilient ecosystems and social systems. So before getting into the webinar, I have a couple of brief slides just again to let you know what it is that we are and what our mission is. So we strive to be globally diverse, inclusive, interdisciplinary, and cross-sectoral, including multiple different actors who are all driving and are subject to wildfires. And the vision is to proliferate resilience and recovery strategies so that we can maximize co-benefits that balance both ecological benefits and reducing ecological impacts, as well as facilitating social well-being. And we are transdisciplinary. So wildfire obviously spans an immense range of topics and scales and disciplines, but to sort of help guide our discussions and our activities, we have defined four pillars of scientific focus. These include what you see on the screen: global change, fire ecology, and biodiversity. So these are a little more ecological in scope. And we also are focusing on fire management and policy, as well as equitable community safety and resilience. We also aim to be transsectoral. We recognize that knowledge about wildfire doesn't just come from the scientific community. It also involves land managers, firefighters, indigenous and local communities, policymakers, etc. So with our collective right now, we've got 3 levels of partnership. One is standard regular members. Membership is free. You are welcome, and we invite you to join and learn and participate. We also have charter members, and these are folks who are helping us to guide our strategic vision and direction. So far, we've got more than 50 charter members from 38 institutions in 12 countries. And we also have institutional partners. And these, some of them you can see on the screen here, are folks who we are collaborating with and partnering with so we can accelerate knowledge exchange and build capacity across the globe, especially in areas that really need it. And what's important is that we know there are a lot of collaboratives and networks and partnerships that are out there, and we don't want to duplicate any efforts. We don't want to compete. We want to join efforts so that we're complementing and augmenting the work so we can really facilitate resilience with this rapidly growing issue. How are we putting it into action? We've got several things that we are working on. One of them we have just launched. It is a multilingual discussion hub. So what that means is that when you speak in your language, you can receive messages back in your language, and other people can do the same. So we can all talk together in our own languages. I've got a picture of it below and a link to join it in this QR code on the screen. And we have already set up a place in the discussion forum so that we can take any questions or discussion following today's webinar and talk about it in this forum. We are also soon to launch a spatial data platform building upon our already existing database and platform, where we'll have data and technology exchange, places for private working groups to work together, upload data, etc. And then we're also having capacity building events, so training seminars, knowledge exchange, partnerships, etc. So this webinar series is part of that. And a few months ago, we had our inaugural webinar. The link for it on YouTube is available. You can see it here. In this webinar, we focused on 3 extreme wildfire events. And these were mostly in Mediterranean type ecosystems, although arguably the Australia case study was not Mediterranean. And what we plan to do now, beginning today, is to focus each webinar in our quarterly series on a different biome. And we'll have a new biome each quarter. And then afterwards, we'll have a series of seminars that synthesize what we've learned, identify gaps, and look at opportunities for building upon what these gaps are. So in terms of biomes, we've all heard of them. There are multiple ways to define them. Whitaker, for example, defined them simply as a function of climatological parameters, temperature, and precipitation. But it's important to also realize that different biomes have very different fire regimes. So some of them have naturally very frequent fires, such as tropical savannas, all the way down to the tundra or tropical rainforests that historically did not experience fire much at all. And of course, within these biomes, there are also diverse fire regimes, and we'll be learning about that today as the North American and the Eurasian boreal forests are different from one another. Oh, Whitaker. And then finally, this is just a map. This is another classification. This is the Olson way of classifying biomes. And you can see the Mediterranean regions in red, which were part of our first webinar. Across the northern areas, you can see the boreal forests. And then next webinar coming in September, we're going to be talking about tropical and subtropical grassland and savannas. So without further ado, let's get into our webinar. We are going to have presentations first. We'll have 4 presentations by Mike Flannigan, talking about North American boreal forests. We will have then Johan Sjöström talking about fires in the European boreal. Jennifer Schmidt will be discussing impacts from wildfire in a rural community in Alaska. And then finally, Sarah Henderson will be finishing it off with a discussion that often, crosses many boundaries, but is especially critical to think about today, which is wildfire smoke issues and health effects. And I think that's it. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and please hold your questions until we're finished with all 4 of the presenters. And then afterwards, we can begin a question and answer series. So we're starting with Dr. Mike Flannigan. He is a research chair in predictive sciences, emergency management, and fire science at the Thompson Rivers University. And you can find more at his website here. And Mike, just let me know when you want me to switch slides, and you're on.
Well, thank you, Alex. Welcome, everyone. Apologies to my Alaskan colleagues. It's going to be very Canada focused. And, there's going to be a lot of climate change in this short talk. And the title, Spreading into Uncharted Territory. And I've started using that phrase since the 2023 fire season, which was just off the charts. And one example of that is what you see in this picture here. And when I give a talk to students, I say, is that a fire or is that a thunderstorm? And of course, it's both. It's a pyrocumulonimbus. And these occurred in the past, and a colleague and I wrote a paper about it in the 80s about pyrocumulonimbus. But now they're becoming very common. We had over 140 in 2023, and we're just seeing more of these intense firestorms. Next slide, please. So the boreal forest, it's circumboreal, circumpolar. I'm going to talk about mostly Canada, but it does spread into Alaska. Cold, long winters, short summer, wildfire seasons. There's a lot of permafrost, whether it's continuous or discontinuous, and that plays a major role, which I probably don't have much time to get into, except for that much of this is peat, and peat's, the boreal forest globally stores about 1/3 of the terrestrial carbon, and much of that is in peatlands. Limited number of tree species. In the North American boreal system, mostly conifer, and they have strategies. They survive and thrive in a regime of semi-regular, stand replacing, stand renewing, high intensity crown fires. And this is different than what we'll hear from Eurasia. They have things like serotinous cones, the pines, jack pine, lodgepole pine, black spruce is semi-serotinous, and what that is a waxy resin. It seals the cone until you have heat from the fire that opens the cone, and that's the next generation. So it's kind of what you see is what you get. So if you see jack pine, fire comes through, you get another jack pine. We also have aspen and aspen suckers. Typically when a fire goes through, above ground, trees killed, but the roots survive, and you get a whole bunch of a new crop of aspen. Next slide, please. So, now these are Canada statistics, but these are mostly boreal statistics. There are some maybe minor changes, which I'll mention. But our area burned, much like Western United States, has quadrupled since the 70s. And my colleagues and I attribute this largely, not solely, to human-caused climate change. I can't be any clearer. 2023 was an exceptional year. 4% of our forests burned. 4%. And I got some pushback saying, oh, it's not that exceptional. In the past, we had fires like this. These are not common years, okay? Because if 4% of your forest burns, there would be no forest, okay? There'd be grasslands or shrublands, but our boreal forest cannot take 25-year fire cycles. As mentioned, these are often high intensity, severity crown fires, spreading from the forest floor to the tops or crowns of the tree. Highly episodic in terms of year-to-year variability. I'm biased. I attribute this to weather, and in particular extreme fire weather. And we're seeing more extreme fire weather in many parts of the globe, including the boreal forest. In terms of cause, in Canada, it's about 50-50, though in spring, human caused dominates. Summers, lightning caused. This is one area that's a little bit different. The boreal, I'd say, is much more lightning dominated. 75% of the fires are started by lightning. But in Canada, these lightning fires burn about 90% of the area burned. And some of these are monitored. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. 3% of our fires burn, 97% of our area burned. So the tail wags the dog. Much of this happens on a relatively small number of days or episodes. We call them spread days of hot, dry, windy. The graph below is for British Columbia. And yes, BC is more than Boreal. The last 3 years, 2023 to 2025, have been dominated by the northeast corner, which is Boreal. And you can see since 1950, the top 5 years have been since 2017. More burn has occurred in the red than in the green, which is just, it's crazy, this ramping up. And, I have colleagues that say, oh, it's because of fuel. I'm sorry, it's because of extreme fire weather. And the reason I can say that is you can look at the year-to-year variability, like 2020, and say not much burned. A couple of years later, 200 times more burned. And the fuel is much the same from year to year. Ignitions change, yes, and the fuel moisture is a big driver. Next slide, please. So this is a simple recipe I use for wildfire. And this applies to the Amazon, Australia, Russia, Canada, Alaska. Fuel, vegetation, we call it fuel, stuff that burns. What type, how much, how dry, how is it structured? Vertically for crown fires as well as horizontally. Ignition, humans, mostly accidental. We get a lot in our Boreal, we get a lot of talk about arson. It's a very, very, very minor player. And lightning is a big player. Weather, hot, dry, windy, extreme fire. And, there's these things that we call them overwintering fires. Some people like the term zombie fire. There's a picture of one in the bottom right, and it burns right through winter. We've had these in the past, but we're seeing a lot more of these because of drought. And actually, as I speak, we've got fires from 2023 still burning in British Columbia. And I've never seen a boreal fire survive 2 winters. And with the ongoing drought, it may survive a 3rd winter. It pales in comparison to Indonesia, where peat fires have been burning for 30 years or more. Next slide, please. Fire management. Canadian fire management, among the best in the world. Here, fire management is the responsibility of the landowner. We have 10 provinces. 2 of the 3 territories do fire management. 1 does not, Nunavut. They have fire, but they let Mother Nature take its course. And it's federal agency, Parks Canada. Many different approaches, from full suppression in some parts of Canada, where you see a fire, you put it out regardless, to modified response based on the individual characteristics of that fire, to just monitoring that fire. Recently, some U.S. members of Congress sent a letter to our Canadian ambassador saying, could you please do a better job of fire management so we don't get smoke in the United States? Sorry, that's we're going to see more fire and smoke. We use the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System. It's been around for 40 plus years. It's being updated. Fire management is challenging. We don't have landmines, fortunately, in our boreal forest, but we do have increasing demands. The wildland-urban interface is spreading into the boreal, and climate change. Next slide. So we're warming globally, and that should come as no news to anyone, and we're continuing to warm. In 2024 was the warmest year on our modern record, and you have to, in terms of carbon dioxide, our levels continue to increase. I normally show the slide from Malloa, but I kept the number of slides limited. But we haven't seen carbon dioxide levels like we're seeing today for 3.5 million years. And I won't have time to talk about the greenhouse gases and how they play a role. We're warming, and we will continue to warm. 2025 may not be as warm as 2024, but it's going to be a very warm year. Next slide, please. So in Canada, and this is true of Alaska and probably true of Siberia as well, we're warming at a much faster rate than the rest of the world. Canada as a country is twice the rate of the rest of the world. Northern areas are 3 or 4 times the rate of the rest of the world. And this warming is going to continue. Next slide, please. So we use GCMs or ESMs, or their names change over time. We may see significant warming. Now, there's been a number of conventional parties COPs, and we've moved away from mitigation to adaptation, at least in my opinion. And even if we honor our commitments, and our track record's abysmal, I would say, we're be near the blue line, which is 3 degrees of warming. And our models have been pretty decent at getting the temperature increases, but in terms of impacts, we've been woefully underestimating the amount of impacts from climate change. I'm not just talking about fire, I'm talking about flooding, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. So, work that I've done and others finds that the warmer we get, the more fire we see. And people say, whoa, why is temperature so important here? And here I'm talking about fire over a larger area, like a province or a state like Alaska, over a longer period of time, like decades. 3 reasons: longer fire seasons. Our fire seasons in the Boreal are short, but they're getting longer. Our busiest day in 2023, exceptional year in terms of area burned, was near the end of September, which is crazy compared to what we normally see. The warmer we get, the more lightning we expect. And last, but probably the most important, as the atmosphere warms, the ability to suck moisture out of the fuel, here I'm talking about dead fuels in the forest floor, increases rapidly. Unless we see more rain to compensate for this drying effect from the warming, our fuels will be drier. Drier fuels, easier for fire to start, whether it's a campfire or a lightning strike, and more of that fuel, vegetation on the forest floor has dried out, available to burn, which leads to these higher intensity fires that are difficult to impossible to extinguish. Next slide, please. So we're seeing more extreme fires. This is a paper by Cunningham et al. In 2024, looking at the most extreme fires. Many of these are pyro-CVs, and you can see they happen a lot in the boreal forest, whether it's Canada, Alaska, or Eurasia. Fire severity is increasing. There's a recent paper by Wei Wang. Car emissions were about 650 teragrams, kind of equivalent to the fossil fuel emissions from India. Those are just from Canadian fires. And global fossil forest fire emissions are increasing largely due to extratropical forests, boreal and temperate. Next slide, please. So options, and we call it Fire Smart in Canada. There's 7 principles. Fire Wise, United States. Focus on community zones, and we're going to hear more about that. Structural protection, sprinklers do work if you get to them in time. Especially if you run them for about 24 hours. Building materials, community planning, egress routes, indigenous local knowledge, more prescribed fire. I put the question mark there because we're going to be hearing in a few minutes from Dr. Sarah Henderson about smoke, and the more we know about smoke, the more we know it's really bad for us. Things like Fire Smart should be mandatory in high-risk locations. Right now, many places they're not. They're rebuilding Jasper, and the new builds have to have 2 of the Fire Smart principles mandatory, which is a good first step, but we got to do more. More emphasis on prevention and mitigation. We spend most of our money on response, and fire management's great at response, but we need to do more prevention. Education plays a role for the human-caused fires, fire bans, forest closures. We don't use them enough. Next slide, please. So I have a couple slides to wrap up, kind of a summary. We're seeing more extreme fire weather, and this is just going to continue. And this is our new reality. Some people say new normal. I don't like that term because it sounds like steady state. We're on a trajectory and it's downward. New territory, uncharted territory. 2023 fire jump across Lake Okanagan has to be 3.5 kilometers. I've never seen a boreal fire jump, though that technically isn't a boreal fire, but we've got fires that ran 60 kilometers in a day. And the pyro-CVs, there's a lot of stuff happening that not typical. Fire and society interactions will increase in the future, and maybe Jen will talk more about that. Learn fire and smoke. Picture in the bottom right is from Northwest Territories, and that was a repeat fire, and regeneration is going to be difficult, and most of the organic material was removed. Next slide, please. Another picture of a Pyro CB. This is on the highway to Yellowknife, 2014. It melted the high-speed internet cable. We're going to see higher intensity fires that are difficult to impossible to extinguish. More wildfires burning through the night. Nighttime used to be a time when fire management could catch their breath. More and more now we're seeing fires burn through the night. There's no quick fix. There's no silver bullet. It's going to take a lot of work, and we need a multi-pronged approach. Status quo in terms of fire management may not, I'm going to say, is not the best approach. We have to change the way we do things. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was great. Next up, we have Dr. Johan Sjöström from the Research Institution of Sweden. He's a senior research scientist. His website is also available here. And if you don't catch it now, this whole webinar will be available recorded in a YouTube video after we're finished. So Johan, please feel free to tell me when to change slides. You're up.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. So I'll be continuing in the boreal landscapes, but just moving east towards the European boreal. This is a picture from 2018 when my country was struck with a significantly severe season. Next slide, please. So the European boreal, that's the blue shaded areas that you see here in this map here. And then if you go further, of course, to the east, you end up in Siberia. But in this part, we have even less species than Mike was talking about. So we have Norway spruce, we have Scots pine, and then a few deciduous trees, silver birch mainly, and that's basically it. And when you move east, larch is growing in numbers. But I'll be talking actually mostly, if you change slide, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, this little triangle, because the Russian part of this area is a little different in the way things are organized in terms of the society. So I'll be mostly talking about this part here, which is Sweden, Finland, the Baltic states, and parts of Norway. Next slide, please. So this region, it differs from other boreal region. Our climate is a bit more benign. So we do have reoccurring dry summers, not as often as they see it in Canada. And also the combination of very dry weather and very strong winds are not that common. If it's a really, really dry season, it's usually quite calm. Next slide, please. But of course, we had a lot of fires in the past, and if you look at dendrochronological studies, this is one of them, but there are many alike. This is from northern Sweden. If you click again, I'm sorry, I have a lot of animations here, so you'll be clicking.
That's fine. No worries.
We can look back several centuries on the fire regimes, and we can see that the cumulative number of fires increasingly. And we can see some different levels here. First, we have, if you click, a sort of a linear part where we have quite a few fires, but not maybe that much. And then late 17th century, if you click again, it's a whole other steepness here. And that this coincides with settlements. So we sort of settled and conquered this land, basically, and we did that with fire. We cannot live on agriculture alone here. We needed also cows. Cow needed herbaceous fuel, so has grass basically to eat. So you had to burn the forest to get food for the cows. No, it's great. And then we end up in the mid 19th century, and then basically fire stopped. And this is when we started industrial forestry. So we populated the country with people working with forestry, and most of all, we built a lot of roads. So if you click again, in terms of area, then of course, back in the days, many hundred years ago, the fires were rare, but very, very large. Then again, they were more, but also smaller. So approximately 1% a year, so 100 years rotation. Again, until mid 19th century, where it essentially stopped. Next slide, please. So how could we do that? Well, this was mostly, if you, next slide. We stopped burning, so we actually banned burning. Not completely, but you couldn't burn on land which was not yours, for example. And we applied these standard measures of attacking the fires, and we had mass mobilization of the rural population, and they had knowledge of fires because they used fires in their work. So there was knowledge of fire, and there was mobilization of fire, and that then ended up in the 20th century with mechanized suppression, of course. And again, we have a better climate in terms of fire, and a bit more favorable landscape structure. It's not so, the mountains aren't that steep, but mostly it's this network of forestry roads. All the European boreal forests are accessible. You can go there. There are roads. Next slide, please. So today, then we have eliminated this fire problem. Well, we have a problem that we have a fire deficit. So there's an ecological problem of a fire deficit. So we do burn a lot for biodiversity. So in all our protected areas, our protected forests, we burn them regularly. And then again, we have also every 5th year or every 7th year, a bad, so to speak, fire season where some fires tend to get really large. And they do that. Next slide, please. Oh, I forgot about this. Today's average is about 0.015%. That's a lot less than the 4% Mike was talking about. And most areas in a year, maybe once a decade or twice a decade. But these fires are then, they come with a great cost because our suppression forces are not used to deal with very large fires. They are used to going out to the fire. The fire is maybe a few hectares big, and they can put it out. Whereas these large fires, like the one we see here, it pretty much outmans us. So it's our municipal firefighters that deal with fires, and they're obliged to do it free of charge for anyone. But then after it's contained, landowners are obliged to care for the mop-up and the surveillance. And half of our forests are big companies. The other half is owned by just individuals who inherited from their granddad. They usually do not have a great capacity for mop-up. Next slide, please. I'll actually skip this, but as Mike said, yeah, we're warming, and it's the same in the European boreal. It's not so much drought that drives the increasing fire weather index. It's the higher temperature leading to lower relative humidity, which basically makes the fine fuel drier, which makes fires more susceptible to burn in the spring, for example. Next slide, please. So our region does differ a bit. There are mainly 3 native species. It's Sylvester pine, the Norway spruce, and the silver birch. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Yeah. And this very dense network of forestry roads, and they look basically like this, and they make it possible for us to enter the forest with fire trucks. and actually also lots of opportunities for fire breaks. Next slide, please. But when we do have large fires, this is where they occur. This is from central Sweden a few years ago. This ended up at I don't know, 3,500 hectares, which is quite large, for us. This land is not empty. I mean, it's not only trees here. I mean, you see a power line there. There are roads in there. There are buildings, houses, even farms, people living. Next slide, please. But it's in these areas which are less populated that fires can grow large, because it takes time for us to reach them. So normally we suppress fires. We're there within 20 minutes. Next slide, please. Here's a graph relating the area of our fires to the response time, and you see in a national perspective, these response times are very, very low. But for us, something above 30 minutes is very long, because then you're likely to see a fire of 100 hectares. If you approach an hour, then you're likely to have a several thousand hectare fire. The next slide, please. And this response time is highly linked to population density, not only because there's longer way to drive to the fire, because also there's a problem of staffing the rescue services. Next slide, please. Yes, and this is accentuated by a rural depopulation, which we've seen the last few decades. Next slide, please. So this is a typical Swedish forest. It's a production forest, mature. You have feather mosses, Sjöström or Hylocomium, like what you see on the right, and then you have a little storage of Vaccinium or Calluna, so blueberry, lingonberry, Calluna on top of that, and this makes perfect fuel, really, really great fuel. Not so much for crowning, but for very intense surface fires. Next slide, please. However, if we have some birches in here, their deciduous litter will actually smother the moss. It will reduce the height, it will reduce the dry mass of the fuel. And this has quite a big impact. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about three main land use legacies that we live with today, and things that will have legacies for the future decades to come. And the first one is pre-commercial thinning of deciduous tree. Next slide. So this, we're a forestry nation. So after a clear cut, we plant new trees. Birches come up naturally, and so does the pines usually. But at the stand age of maybe 15 to 20 years, we remove all the birches to favor the conifers, which we want for timber. However, if you would let just a few of them stay, it has a huge impact. So these green lines here you see on the right, this is the litter reduction depth factor. So if we have a basal area of about 2.5 birches, which is basically every 10th tree, give or take, we see a reduction in depth of a third. And this, for anyone who's done fire propagation modeling, this has a huge effect on the fire propagation. And you will still have a great conifers forest to manage. Next slide, please. Next legacy is introduction of foreign species. So in particular, it will be lodgepole pine, especially for Sweden. Next slide. So it's planted on 600,000 hectares in Sweden. It's anticipated to grow a bit more as of now, and it is more flammable compared to the normal Scots pine that we have. There are other examples in Europe which are much worse. For example, the eucalypt plantations of Portugal and Spain. That's in another league. But this is at least something which changes our landscapes a bit. Next slide, please. Number 3 is draining and then also re-wetting of our forest lands. Next slide. So we've been doing this for the whole 20th century. We've been draining our forest in order to help growth of the trees. This is now forbidden since mid-90s, I think. It's nowadays prohibited to do it in undrained land, but you are allowed to maintain your ditches. These pictures are maybe a bit extreme. That's an extreme ditch you see, and that's an extreme wetland. But if you change the slide again, this is something you often come across. You walk in the forest, you see a little ditch. It might be 50 years old. This one is new, but they do change the landscape from having lots of patches of wetlands to fewer patches of less wetland. And nowadays we try to re-wet them. We get money to maintain these ditches. We also get money to refill the ditches in order to restore the wetlands. So we have two competing interests here that are working against each other. And the legacy for what we do here is very, very long, of course. Next slide, please. There are some other land use legacies. One is fertilization of the forest. The Boreal is at least our part, is nutrient limited. So it's not water limited as in the Mediterranean. So fertilization makes a big difference. The loss of suppression knowledge when people live further and further away from fire. There's an increasingly automatic forestry industry with fewer people in the forest, even though there are lots of machines. And then you have this abandonment of small pastures and agricultures, which accumulates grass. So this is what we call a typical abandoned farmland. It's not an abandoned place. There's lots of people living here. There's a kindergarten in your upper right corner. But this place would probably serve as pasture or small agriculture in the 70s. Nowadays, that's not economically viable, so it looks like this. This is highly flammable during our sunny spring days. It won't lead to a massive wildfire. It will be a small one, but it will be a small one which travels very far and have the potential to cause a lot of damage for people. Okay, next slide, please. So just to sum up, the choices we make today will have bearing on wildfire hazards for decades to come. It will, and we also live with legacies of past decisions. And some of these are not very easily assessed. They do require local knowledge and consideration of the cultural practices and history that you have. So this will differ if you're in Finland, maybe, or if you're in the Baltic states, or if you go further into Russia. Next slide, please. Just a reminder also that some fires are quite beautiful. And this is from a good fire. This is a prescribed fire that we've done in a conservation area a few years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Okay, so we are moving into the human factors, not that there's a true separation. We have Dr. Jennifer Schmidt. She is an associate professor of natural resources management and policy at the Institute of Social and Economic Research in the University of Alaska. I also have her URL listed here. And with that, Jen, I welcome you to begin.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to talk. I'm going to be talking about some work that I did in the McKinley wildfire, which is a wildfire that happened in 2019 north of Anchorage here. So it is a wildland urban interface, but it is kind of sparsely populated. Next slide. So during this fire, there were some structures that were lost. And by structures, we mean people's primary residence, along with outbuildings, so outhouses, cabins, storage sheds, things like that. Next. So I used both social and ecological data to answer three primary questions. How important were the surrounding vegetations and fuels for why some structures survived and others didn't? What role did wildfire behavior play? And then also looking at, the development of parcels and whether how they were developed matters. Next slide. To do this, there was some field work involved, so I spent quite a bit of the summer in a tent out in this area with a lot of mosquitoes, and went around and talked with residents, also did some field work assessing burn severity and vegetation in the year after the fire. We did put together a video if we have time to watch, because the residents really wanted to see what they went through. They wanted lessons from that to help other Alaskans and other people who might be faced with wildfires, because people were evacuated and it was rather chaotic when this fire went down. And then we used logistic regression modeling to figure out which of these variables I mentioned and we'll go through were associated with why some structures survived and others didn't. Next slide. So a little bit of a background. As I mentioned, this was a 2019 fire north of Anchorage here. This area actually has had other fires in the vicinity. In 2015, there was Sockeye Fire, which was started by fireworks, and then people just drove off as the fire started to burn. This day in particular, there were 9 other wildfires that started. It was an extremely hot day. And that's the theme of the summer. The bottom graph there shows that this was the driest summer ever in South Central Alaska. And there was predicted to be very, very strong winds. So when I was talking to people who lived in this area, they could just smell that the forest was ready to burn. And people live in this area because, I mean, they like to be surrounded by nature, and they knew that it was probably going to be a bad day. Next slide. And so we used some pre-burn imagery from the Matsu Borough. So in Alaska, we don't have counties like they have in the lower 48. We have things called boroughs. And I think this borough might be the size of the state of Virginia. It's very, very large. So in the previous slide, you're talking about response times and getting people out to places. You have a large area to cover in Alaska to get to some of these fires. And in 2017, they took some high resolution imagery. We used this to identify structures prior to the wildfire. We also used a GIS database that the borough maintains of building outlines, but we found that it needed some help. There were some inaccuracies, and people are always loving to put little buildings on their property and not tell the tax assessor that they put additional buildings on their property. Next slide. This is a post imagery from after the wildfire. So the year after, they flew it again. And as you can see the burn there in that imagery. You can see some of the structures are present, some of them are not. Next slide. And with that, we digitized, added in missing buildings, took out buildings that were never there in the first place. And then we marked buildings that survived the wildfire and those that did not survive the wildfire. There you'll see in red are the buildings that burned, and the green are the buildings that survived. Next slide. So some of the factors that we explored related to fire behavior are day of the fire. We are able to use the VEERS imagery that you saw in a couple slides back to figure out which section of that fire perimeter burned. Next. Distance to the start of the fire. So this fire started at the top, and we measured the straight line distance to each of the buildings. Next slide. And then burn severity. So here you can see a picture of the burn severity on the right-hand side. At the very top of that is like a little teal cyan thumbprint. That's where the fire started. Yep, up towards the top, likely a power line hit. And then it was pushed south very, very fast. And the purple colors, the red colors indicate high severity. When I was doing field work, I went out to spots and I was up to my mid-thigh in water the year after. the year before, bone dry. That's how dry it was. And we found that by doing these composite burn index, so on the ground assessment of burn severity, it did correlate very well with the Sentinel-2 data. This had been done before with Landsat information, which is at a 30-meter resolution. So this is kind of one of the first explorations of the Sentinel-2 data, which is at a 10-meter resolution. So we were confident that when we use this to assign burn severity to our buildings and parcels, it was pretty accurate. Next slide. Vegetation, we explored vegetation by looking at greenness at 3 different scales, and these kind of correspond to Fire Smart or FireWise here in the States. 10-meter resolution, 30-meter resolution, and 100-meter, so drawing buffers around the buildings, circular buffers. And we use the aerial imagery to visually inspect whether the ground was barren or whether it had vegetation. Next slide. And here you can see an example of a building with the buffers around it at 3 different scales. Next. And here are the hexagons that we laid down in the area. And you'll see the purple ones are where we said that there was no vegetation, and the green ones are where there was indicated vegetation within our different buffer sizes. Now walking around this area, it's a mix of spruce, which is highly flammable, and there are a lot of cottonwoods in this area too. So looking at this imagery, I can tell, say on the right-hand side, that there's a real spruce boggy area. But a lot of the greenness that you're seeing here is more mixed and a lot of cottonwoods. So that'll become important. Next slide. Another thing that we looked at was our hazardous fuels in there, or in this case, it's called our flammability hazard rating, and wildfire exposure. And so wildfire exposure was originally developed by a Canadian, Jen Beverly. I've modified the approach for Alaska, and the citation is there. But basically how this works is you have a vegetation data set. And in this case, it was the above NASA product, the land cover by Wang. It's a 30-meter resolution data set with 15 different categories, and it goes from 1984 to 2014. So we took these different vegetation classes, gave them a flammability rating, and then what you do is you look at the average flammability rating within either a 500-meter search radius, so that center cell represents not just the hazardous fuels or the flammability in that cell, but around it. And then you also look at it at the 100-meter resolution. And the 500 is meant to reflect more long-distance ember dispersal. Embers are the things that burn most houses, especially in the boreal forest. Spruce, there's torching, there's embers everywhere. And then the 100-meter is more short distance ember dispersal, and radiant heat issues come in. The fire is very close to whatever you're evaluating. And then that average score is your exposure. So next slide. And here you'll see kind of how we scored them. The original published methods just said, gave it a 1. Yes, there's torching, there's ember dispersal. No, there isn't. Jen Beverly had more fine scale data than we had, so we dropped the 30-meter resolution, and we also changed it to be a score of 100 down to 0 to give it more fine detail. Like with the evergreen forest, the spruce, the woodland, yes, there's lots of ember dispersal, there's lots of torching, it gets the maximum. When you come to mixed forests, now you got some deciduous trees in there, the cottonwoods, it starts to temper some of that fire behavior, and then you get down into the shrubs and not so much the torching is happening, so it gets a lower value. The 100 meters are always going to be higher because that fire is right there, it's more intense. And in a way, it kind of reflects that buildings are fuels. To have the higher values, buildings, are made of highly flammable material, and so these numbers are bumped up in that finer resolution. Next slide. So this is what they look like, the exposure maps. On the left-hand side, you'll see the 100-meter, so a more detailed exposure map. You can see that the wildfire scar does nicely follow in some places the orange and the red. And on the right-hand side is the 500-meter exposure, so it's kind of more smoothed out because of looking at a larger radius. So each of the buildings parcels was assigned a wildfire exposure value. Next slide. Some developmental factors that we looked at. Next. Here you'll see distance to nearest building and distance to nearest burning building. We looked at both of them. Just kind of the straight line distance between various buildings there was calculated. Next. Size of lot. The parcel database that the Matsu Bureau had was used to look at lot size. Next. The number of buildings per parcel. So we counted that up. Next. Land, home, and values. So, is the property more valuable? Is the home more valuable? And next. And near lots with debris. In talking with the firefighters who responded to this, this area had some places they didn't feel comfortable going into. And people agree, firefighters do not need to lose their lives in their job. And so they would look at a place, and if it looks like a junkyard, if it looks like that structure might not be inhabited, it's not worth their lives. They're going to move on and go to some place that is nice and cleared out that looks like someone lives there. There's also the issue of exploding vehicles, exploding propane tanks. People commented there was funny colors of gas coming out of here. So, yeah, we thought that might be an important explanatory value. And one of the things, that we wanted to do with this project was go in and take pictures after the wildfire. I quickly decided that was not a wise idea to do. It needed a lot more community relationship building, trust building. This is an area of Alaska where people definitely value their privacy. It's also an area where you have a lot of cameras and you have a lot of guns. So it's not wise to go tromping on people's property. And crime has been an issue, but that actually helped with this wildfire and getting people out safely. They had developed a crime phone tree to call up neighbors when they were seeing suspicious activities. That actually was used during the wildfire and the evacuation to help call up neighbors and get people out safely. Because not everyone was getting the responses, the text messages on their phones. So it turned out to be helpful in the end. Next slide. All right, so what does all those variables, what was important? Well, based on our modeling, one of the biggest factors for survivorship was not having a burning building within 30 meters of your building. So when there is no burning building nearby within 30 meters, you have a 40% lower odds of the structure burning. I've already applied this lesson here in Anchorage because we have a housing shortage here in Anchorage, and they are putting forth bills to put more parcels on properties here in Anchorage where we already have egress issues. And I suggested that was not the wisest idea to do because as you get more buildings closer together, you just have a conduit for fire to happen. And if you have limited egress, that's a disaster. So plan wiser. Lot size. Bigger lot sizes were less likely to burn. Building size, so the bigger the building, the more likely to burn. Probably, it's more surface area for embers to get caught on. If you have higher wildfire exposure, you indeed are more likely to see your structure burn. Packing parcels on a property, yes, that's more likely for your structure to burn. Building value, more expensive houses tended not to burn. This maybe could be due to they have the money to do firewise. The home looks like it's been lived in. It's maybe people have insurance and have been, done things. That's still, something to explore. This vegetation cover actually helped reduce the likelihood that your building burns. And I think that is because there are deciduous trees in this area, and those wet leaves can help put the embers out. When they land on those wet leaves, it snuffs them out, kind of can help them from getting in the gutter, getting around people's houses. So it actually was a benefit. And this is important because when people think fire-wise, fire smart, they think I've got to cut down all the trees on my property. No, no, you don't have to do that. You can leave your deciduous, your birch, your cottonwood, some of your willows. Obviously, the spruce should go or be limbed up. And burn severity, yes, if fire behavior was, more extreme, then yes, your building is more likely to burn. So next slide. So in conclusion, distance to the nearest burning building does become significant, becomes insignificant when we correct for spatial autocorrelation, but burn severity is always significant. So fire behavior is always significant. Packing more buildings onto a lot increases the chance that one of those structures will burn. And if it's within 30 meters, then you probably get the other structure to burn. So really allowing for spacing. And we're not quite sure about the reasons for the more expensive places less likely to burn. I think that's more of an area for exploration. And next slide. Yeah, I'd like to thank the funding. EPSCoR funded this research, also the state of Alaska. And we do have a paper on this, and we put together a YouTube video with our interviews of residents and firefighters that work the fire. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen. That's great. And I will put the link to the YouTube video in the discussion forum so that folks have a chance to see that because I don't think we'll have enough time to show it today. So folks can access that in the discussion forum. Next up, we've got Dr. Sarah Henderson. She's a professor of the Occupational and Environmental Health Division. She's also scientific director at both the Environmental Health Services for the BC Centre for Disease, as well as the National Collaborating Centre for Environmental Health. And again, you can find her at this link. And Sarah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will say that I am primarily the scientific director of environmental health at the BC Centre for Disease Control. I'm cross-appointed to UBC, but that is not my primary affiliation. And wow, this is not the title that I had intended for this talk. Something has gone wrong here, and I hope not a lot of things have gone wrong here. But I do want to talk to you today about wildfire smoke, kind of what we know in general, and then a little bit about boreal forest. So let's go to the next slide and see if we've got the right set of slides here. Okay, this is going well so far. I am joining you today from the traditional and never ceded territory of the Coast Salish people in British Columbia, Canada. This is the homelands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And when we're talking about boreal forest, I do want to highlight that this is the home to many Indigenous people across the world. In Canada, there's more than 600 Indigenous communities in the boreal forest, and I know that's true in the European and Asian boreal as well. So it's something to keep in mind when we're talking about these impacts. This is gifted teaching from a knowledge keeper in the Musqueam First Nation here in what we now call Vancouver, Nutsamat. It means we are all one. And, I think Mike Flannigan set the scene with where we're at with respect to climate change, and a reminder that what we do to this planet, we do to ourselves. Next slide, please. So I have been studying the health effects of wildfire smoke in Canada and globally for more than 20 years now, but primarily in Canada and primarily in BC. And most forest fire in Canada is boreal fire, although the boreal maybe does not stretch down into all of British Columbia. We're still talking about dry pine forest in many cases. So I am going to draw mostly on examples from my own research to talk about this. But I also want to say that, into some degree, smoke is smoke is smoke, and the source of that smoke with respect to the fuels is a secondary consideration. Next slide, please. What we are seeing in Canada will reflect what is happening in many other locations around the world, which is that smoke is starting to overtake other sources of air pollution emissions. So this is a multi-year timeline of the sources of fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, in Canada. The purple bars represent the contributions of dust and smoke, while the bars of the other colors represent contributions from other sources, such as home heating, vehicles, and agriculture. And what you see if you look at the beginning of the time series is that smoke and dust, and this is mostly not dust, were a relatively small fraction of the overall emissions. And when you move to the 2022 end of the time series, you see that they are more than half of the total emissions, even though overall the emissions are going down, and that's not going to be true for years like 2023, for example, which isn't included in this time series. But we're in this position where we know that air pollution is harmful to human health. And so we've made these regulations over the course of years to reduce air pollution from other sources, driven by that evidence on the human health impacts, but we can't regulate the smoke emissions. And so they're becoming a bigger and bigger piece of the pie, especially as we have these more severe wildfire seasons. Next slide, please. And if we look at the past 3 years in Canada, what we have available so far for 2025, this line here is that unprecedented, off the charts season that Mike talked about. This is 2024 here, so still, compared with the past 20 years, a different type of season. And here we are so far in 2025. So we are definitely seeing this shift in emissions from wildfires corresponding with these extreme seasons, and the piece of the pie that goes to wildfire smoke, we anticipate, is going to grow and grow and grow in the years ahead. There will be high interannual variability, but this is what I call the new pollution. This is what we have to worry about now. We don't have to worry about, in North America, as much as we did before anyway, cars and industry. This is really where it's at when we're talking about air pollution exposures into the decades ahead. Next slide, please. So what is wildfire smoke? And there is no single answer to this question. You can go to a fire and take a vacuum sample of the smoke, and then 10 minutes later take another vacuum sample of the smoke, and you're probably going to see two different things. It's a very complex mixture of air pollutants, but when we break it down into simple terms, what we have is inorganic gases, organic gases, and fine particulate matter that is a combination of organic and inorganic materials. And when I say fine particulate matter, I'm talking about very small particles. We often look at PM 2.5, or particles less than 2.5 microns in diameter, because we measure these in many, many locations across Canada and across the world for regulatory purposes, and because we know that particles in that size range can penetrate deep into the human lungs. Now, what I'm showing on this screen is that often when we're talking about the fine particles in wildfire, we're talking about what we call soot balls or tar balls. They're very, very tiny particles that aggregate together into these larger kind of amorphous shapes. And that's important because when we have such small particles, we have a very high surface area to volume ratio. And so when they come in contact with the tissues of the body, there's lots of interaction between the particles and the tissues. Next slide, please. Now, when these particles get into your lungs, there are 3 different mechanisms of harm. The first is simple irritation. You have a foreign body in your lungs. The second is inflammation. That foreign body gets treated by your immunological system the same way a bacterium or a virus would get treated by your immunological system. It sends out a response. But because the particles are not living, they cannot be neutralized by that response, and the response goes a bit haywire and causes local inflammation that can also cause whole body inflammation. So these particles don't just affect your lungs, they affect your entire body through this inflammatory pathway. And then finally, the very smallest particles, the ultrafine fraction, those are less than like 0.1 micron in diameter, can cross into your bloodstream from the alveolar region of the lung and circulate through the whole body, where they have access to every organ system in the body, including the brain, because they are small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier. So a lot going on, and please never think that wildfire smoke is only affecting your lungs. It is affecting all of you. Next slide, please. Now, what's in the smoke is going to depend on ever-changing conditions, the fuels, the fire itself, how hot it's burning, and the surrounding atmospheric conditions. Is it cloudy out? Is there sun interacting with the smoke and providing UV that is going to change the chemical nature of that smoke? You will never get the same smoke twice, but these are the considerations that we need to think about when we're talking about smoke conditions. Next slide, please.
Come on. Sorry. I don't know why it's not forwarding.
I got a purple hand here. This is a really complex slide. I don't need you to understand all of the complexity, but what they've done here is exposed mice to flaming and smoldering smoke from different types of fuels, as well as 2 control substances. The black substance is very toxic. The white substance is very not toxic. And so we've got red oak, we've got peat, we've got pine needles, we've got pine wood, and we've got eucalyptus. 2 key things. Smoldering smoke is different from flaming smoke when we're talking about the same particle concentrations, and different types of fuels have different toxicities. Now, this is in, tightly controlled laboratory settings. We are not in a place in the epidemiological literature where we necessarily see these differences, except we do see a very strong response to peat smoke in populations. But it's worth knowing that pine forests, hardwood forests, may have different impacts on the health of populations because the smoke toxicity may be different. It's not all the same stuff. Next slide, please. And then one of the big questions in my field at this time, especially if we look at the fires, like what happened in LA this year, is what happens when we have interface fires or fires that essentially simply turn into urban conflagration, because then we have a lot of anthropogenic fuels burning. That's going to be an even more toxic type of smoke. It is mixed with the smoke from the wildland fuels, and it is a emerging area of significant concern because we keep seeing these types of fires. Next slide, please. Now, another important concept is stage of life matters when it comes to exposures. Whenever we have these exposures during periods of rapid biological development, there is the opportunity for lifelong harm to occur because we have the smoke interrupting rapid cellular division in utero or in these early stages of life. When we're talking about kind of more middle life, when people are more active but generally more healthy, that's going to be a different thing again. And then later life, when people are starting to lose lung capacity, they are starting to have more chronic health conditions, smoke exposures are going to mean something different again. Next slide, please. To demonstrate this, these are some data from our work in BC. These are from my PhD student, Emma Branch, and she is looking at severe birth outcomes related to exposure during pregnancy. And what we see in this study is there's actually no effective exposure in the low wildfire years, which are the red dots. But during the extreme wildfire years of 2017 and 2018 in BC, we see there's a strong relationship with preterm birth, an even stronger relationship with very preterm birth, an even stronger relationship with extreme preterm birth. If you've ever had an extreme preterm birth baby, you know that this is a significant impact, and also a strong relationship with stillbirth. Clear evidence that these exposures are affecting infants as they develop. Next slide, please. And these are from my PhD student, Jeanette Lan. This is looking at respiratory infections in the first year of life as they relate to exposures during pregnancy. And what she found is that their exposures during all periods of pregnancy were associated with increased risk of respiratory infections and respiratory infections treated with antibiotics, but that the period of highest risk was during that critical second trimester. And that's not surprising. This is when that baby is exploding in the womb. So again, that period of very rapid development, we are seeing a larger effect there. Next slide, please. And then these are data across the BC population on a smoky day. The primary thing I want to point out here is that when we look at the acute respiratory effects, we see almost a 100% increase across all of the outcomes we're looking at: drug dispensations, physician visits for respiratory outcomes, and respiratory mortality. When we look at the cardiovascular effects, we also see impacts, but they are much, much smaller than the respiratory effects. Smoke is very irritating for people with any kind of pre-existing respiratory condition. That's probably the particles, it's probably the co-pollutants that we don't even measure, but we know that folks with asthma and COPD are kind of the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to wildfire smoke. Next slide, please. And then finally, I want to point out that smoke has longer lasting health effects, and we are learning about those. It's not surprising. We know air pollution from other sources has longer lasting health effects. There's no reason we'd expect smoke to be different. But this is a study from Scott Weichenthall's group at McGill showing that living near to wildfire activity was associated with increased risk of lung cancer an increased risk of brain cancer. And you can see most of that fire here is in the Boreal. Now, they didn't look at smoke specifically, but they do hypothesize that wildfire smoke is the pathway by which these exposures are occurring. Next slide. So this is just to remind you that we are in the infancy of the evidence around wildfire smoke. I started publishing in this field in 2010. I think my paper was one of about 5 papers on wildfire smoke that year. You can see that we're having this rapid increase in the evidence. That is fantastic. That's what we need. But we still have a corpus of evidence of less than 10,000 studies right now. And the final slide is to show you the same for air pollution more broadly. Here we have a corpus of evidence of almost 900,000 studies, so it is 100 times larger than where we're at with wildfire smoke. And my point here is that we can really lean on this corpus of evidence around air pollution because what we're seeing for wildfire smoke is not so dramatically different that we need to totally ignore what we already know about air pollution. There's stuff we need to learn about wildfire smoke for sure, but we can lean on the evidence that we already have to help inform how we manage these exposures at the population scale. And that's what I've got for you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great. Well, this was amazing. So much to think about and so much to absorb. I would like to, well, first, if you're interested in anything else relative to the Global Wildfire Collective, we've got QR codes. One, just to learn about our work. Another one is we have generated a letter to urge the UN conventions to consider wildfire and climate and their biodiversity and desertification. So you are welcome to read and participate in that call to action. And finally, for discussion of today's speakers and what they had to share with us, please go to the QR code in the middle. And before I ask any questions, I would like to open it up to Robin, who has been fielding the questions coming in from the audience to ask any of our speakers.
It actually looks like, Alex, that the Q&A function is not working for some reason on the webinar. So I would like to ask people if they have questions, please add it to the chat. But at the moment, Alex, we don't have any questions in there. So why don't you jump to your and then.
Sure. I had so many questions just listening to everybody, but I had prepared questions. My first ones were, and we don't have that much time, so I don't know if folks want to stay on any longer or whether we move a lot of this over to the discussion forum. But I had initial questions for Doctors Flannigan and Sjöström about the ecological issues in the boreal forests. And then I also had some questions about some of the human impacts. A lot of them are really geographical in nature, in that I'm wondering, to what extent do you see a need to better integrate research and coordination across geographical regions? Is this already happening? What are the potential risks and benefits? Because something that I talk about and think about a lot is that at times imposing management strategies that are applicable in one region onto another can have unintended consequences, in that you can sometimes make things worse than make them better. And this really applies both to the human side of the research as well as to the ecological side of the research. And I would welcome anyone to, Robin, if you have anybody answer or asking questions in the chat, please let me know. Otherwise, I will
chime in. Nothing there yet. So
okay. So, or otherwise, do any of the speakers have questions of any of the other speakers? Okay.
I'm not one of the speakers, but I did have a question.
Okay.
I'm very curious about why there's so much density of the forest roads in the Baltic region. And because it's interesting, because in other parts of the world, road density actually is directly tied to frequency of fire. And in this case, it looks like it's a positive answer. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to have you address.
I had that same thought because roads are such a common source of fire ignitions. But
Mhm.
I guess it's an interaction with remoteness and population density.
Do you want me to comment on that?
That'd be great.
Yeah. Of course, same thing here. The more roads, actually, the more people you have, the more fires, of course. But the reason they are there is that our landscapes are blessed with what you see here, rivers, right? So it was very easy for us to sort of start up forestry early on. So we have a network and infrastructure for forestry, which you do not see in North America, for example. And that made it worthwhile to building all these roads. So we have this dense network of roads, and it just allows us to quickly assess a fire. So yeah, they lead to more fires if there are more people there. So for sure, ignitions will increase, but ignitions are not our main concern. Our main concern is an ignition that we do not we're not able to respond to within an hour. Then we have a problem. But as soon as we can get there in 30 minutes, all fires are small from the beginning. So this is the key for suppression in this region, and it's the same all over Finland, Sweden, the Baltic nations, and so on. I mean, some of them are blocked, but it's very easy for the firefighter to just cut them open and go there.
Okay, interesting. I had a question for Sarah, actually, which because all of the talks had to be somewhat abbreviated, I'm interested in the question of prescribed fire smoke versus wildfire smoke. And I know you have a lot of thoughts of that, but given that wildfire or prescribed fire can be beneficial in some regions and can offset the effects of fire, what are your thoughts on that? Do you have any nuggets to share? Smoke is smoke, right? I'm sure that's the
Yeah, so prescribed fire smoke is not beneficial to human health. It may lead to less exposure to wildfire smoke over time. There's kind of growing evidence in this area. I certainly support prescribed burning. What we really need is a population that is resilient to smoke and a population that knows how to live with smoke in the same way that we need a population that's resilient to fire and a population that knows how to live with fire. So when we're doing prescribed burning, we need to be communicating with the potentially affected populations about the potential health risks, about how to protect themselves from those health risks, about what to do if they feel unwell, and providing that information and acknowledging that smoke may harm the health of the population. One of the things I didn't show in the talk, again, because things were kind of truncated, is oftentimes people expect that these health harms occur at very high smoke concentrations. That is absolutely not the case. Indeed, the sort of steepest risk function is at the low concentrations, and biologically, that kind of makes sense. People tend to believe that if the smoke is 10 times worse, then it's 10 times worse for your health, but it's not actually. It's only about 2 times worse for your health because your system gets kind of pretty tapped out in responding to the smoke at relatively low concentrations. So when we're talking about prescribed fire smoke, it's not necessarily better just because it's lower intensity.
Mike.
Mike's got a question.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I want to respond to that question as well, because some of the arguments, and there's lots of good arguments for prescribed fire, but the argument that a little smoke now saves you a lot of smoke later is just not valid. Take a look at the Eastern Seaboard in 2023. The note the U.S. Congress people sent to our Canadian ambassador about smoke, it's long distance smoke that is causing those problems. And so a little smoke, if you burn around your community, you get smoked out from a fire 1,000 kilometers away. So that argument's not valid. Okay? My question for Sarah is, air quality uses a number of different metrics, and one of them is PM 2.5. And but the distribution of wildland fire smoke is quite varied. How much is below that 2.5 threshold? I know it varies a great deal, and from a human health perspective, the smaller it gets, the more harmful it is, or something else?
Complicated, and I'll answer this question and then I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go. So it depends, and what we typically see is that the mode of the size distribution of PM from wildfire smoke is about PM1. So 1 micron is kind of the central tendency. As the smoke ages, that central tendency increases because the particles all start sticking together and getting larger, but there is a significant amount of smoke under that ultra fine fraction. And we know from other evidence that because that ultra fine fraction can cross into the bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier, it carries a series of risks that somewhat larger particles do not carry. So it's not necessarily the case that the smaller the worse, because the deposition in the body changes as the particle size changes as well. It's not just a straight line, but we do need to be aware that there is a size distribution to this smoke. It's not a bunch of perfect particles that are exactly 2.5 microns floating around out there, and that it does tend to the smaller, more harmful particle distribution.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, everyone.
And we are at time. So if Robin, I don't know if there are any questions, and if not, I don't know if anybody has anything else you want to say, but I again encourage everybody to go to our discussion forum where if you do have questions, you are welcome to ask. And we will also post the link to, we'll post the link to the prior webinar as well as the video that Jennifer had to share.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it appears that we had some sort of technical difficulty with the question submission. So that's a great reason for people to click that QR code in the middle and find the Boreal Forest webinar discussion thread and submit your questions there, because all our speakers will be in there as well to answer questions.
Okay, great. Well, with that, thank you so much to all of you for agreeing to speak. This was so amazing. Your talks were all so informative, and we will post information about our next webinar in September on our discussion forum. And until then, I think we can call it a wrap.